macroeconomic equilibrium, primarily in the short run to begin, and then in the long run to finish it out, okay? I want you guys to know, I started this a little bit with you yesterday. I started planting the seeds of this for yesterday. So we're going to mostly identify, we're gonna show, and we're gonna explain, okay? And then if we have time at the end of class, I'm gonna have you guys do a practice FRQ, okay? So, the thing I want to say about macroeconomic equilibrium, whether or not it is short run or long run, is that it is it's a model concerned with abstractions. What I mean by that is it cannot capture all of the things, but it does do a good job of illustrating a point, okay? So I don't want you guys to think that this is reality. I just want you to know that it's capturing a few things and illustrating some important points about how the economy as a whole works. The other thing to keep in mind is that all these things are snapshots in time. And like if we're looking at data from 1929 to 1933, news moved a lot slower, way slower, even though they had radios at that point and telegraphs that could, send instant messages. It still was slow. So our macroeconomic models, we're imagining this slice in time, but it's already changing right now as I speak. So I just wanted you guys to kind of keep that in mind as you're looking at this. This is a sort of, we're looking at it in a vacuum, even though that's not how the world really works. Okay. This is just talking about when we're in equilibrium, what is the aggregate price level and the aggregate output, okay? In the same way that we have an equilibrium price in quantity in microeconomics. But this is just like the price level for the whole economy and the output level for the whole economy. And again, this is very abstract. Because when we're talking about output, we're putting a dollar value on it. We're not talking about 3 billion paper clips and 200,000 SUV. You know what I mean? Like it's quantified in a slightly different manner. Okay. So the short run aggregate demand, aggregate supply model combines aggregate demand and the short run aggregate supply curve. And to find the equilibrium in the short run, it's the place at which these two curves intersect. Okay, so that's short run macroeconomic equilibrium, and it's basically the quantity of output is equal to the price level for both demand and short run supply. Okay? All right, now we know from yesterday that the short run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. Producers are responding to higher prices by producing more, but that because of wages being flexible and prices being flexible, the short run aggregate supply curve flattens up to a vertical, perfectly inelastic curve in the long run, because as people get laid off, or if we're running at excess capacity, wages come way up, the short run aggregate supply curve has to adjust to those things by either decreasing or increasing so that we circle back to where we started from at potential output. Okay? Okay. So because the short run equilibrium output equals long run, the economy is in long run macroeconomic equilibrium at E sub LR. So this is what I drew for you yesterday on the board. And I want you to get really familiar with that, because you will frequently get FRQs that say you start with the macroeconomic equilibrium, okay? And then something happens, and then you have to track that change and whatever policy prescriptions might be in place for that change to bring us back to equilibrium. Okay. Okay. So in the short run, aggregate demand or short run aggregate supply curve can shift. for a variety of different reasons. Ones that we just talked about at the beginning of class, right? Taxes got increased or decreased. Government spending got increased or decreased. Stock market's doing this. Consumer confidence is doing that. Or there's a supply shock, like the oil fields in Saudi Arabia being blown up, or in the recent history, the Ukrainian war starting, okay? When that happens, the result is an output gap, okay? And what that means is that short-run macroeconomic equilibrium is not in alignment with long-run macroeconomic equilibrium, okay? So let's kind of tease this out. So here's price level. We're going to say that this is our long-run aggregate supply, and we start in macroeconomic equilibrium. Okay, we start there. Now, let's say that we have a situation that was described in a workbook problem. The stock market crashes, it goes down by, let's say, 4%, which is a big change in the stock market value. It decreases by 4%. First of all, which curve is going to be impacted on that graph? What direction is it going to go in?
It's going to decrease.
Yes. Okay. So, aggregate demand is going to decrease to AD sub 2. This is our new short-run macroeconomic equilibrium after this decrease in aggregate demand. Because it is to the left of our potential output, this is a recessionary gap. Okay? If this is the situation for the US economy, where aggregate demand decreases, and then we get a new short-run macroeconomic equilibrium, we're going to see a movement along that short-run aggregate supply curve. What else is going to be happening here? Like just the macroeconomic conditions. What's going to happen to price level? Will we be experiencing inflation, deflation, no change in price level? Which is it? As a result of this decrease in aggregate demand, what do you think is going to happen to price level? Lily? It's going to decrease. So we should see deflation. What's going to be happening with unemployment?
It'll rise.
It will rise. When we are off of our long-run aggregate, like if we're off of our potential output to the left of it and we're in a recessionary gap, we should expect for unemployment to increase. Because we learned yesterday, remember, that in the short run, there's a relationship between price level and unemployment levels, right? Okay, they're inversely related. Okay, so that's a recessionary gap. Now, given what we talked about yesterday, we're getting out of short run. What do you think is going to happen? Like, how's this going to ultimately play itself out so that we're back to potential output? What's going to happen? Bentley?
Will they lay off workers, and workers will be able to join again, willing to work for less pay, and that will slowly bring things back?
Yes. So what we would expect to happen from here in the long run, with wages and prices being unstuck, so to speak, we would expect that short-run aggregate supply will increase. in response to all these people being laid off and there being a higher than normal unemployment rate, right? Cyclical unemployment is going to increase. That's going to make nominal wages decrease, which will cause short run aggregate supply to shift to the right. Okay, so now we're back at potential output. Okay? So the opposite or the converse, also true. If there is what's called an inflationary gap, so let's just run through that one real quick. Let's see if I can erase this so that, I have to just redo it. That's okay. I love that I have all these different colors and markers now. Okay, so here's long run aggregate supply curve. Here's our short run aggregate supply curve, sub 1. Oh, I can never get it to line up just right. There we go. Here's aggregate demand. Okay, so we start, we're in long run macroeconomic equilibrium. And then let's say that what's something that could happen that would lead to aggregate demand increasing? What's something that could happen that would shift that? Anybody? Okay, everyone feels really confident about the future. Everyone's super optimistic. Firms are optimistic, consumers are optimistic, and then we get an increase in aggregate demand to AD sub 2. Now, in this case, we have an inflationary gap. Okay, and that is because our level of output is greater than our potential output. Okay? What's going to happen in this case? Once we take off the short run parameters and say all wages and prices are unstuck. What's going to happen to these firms right here? They are all trying to produce more to get to this new aggregate demand.
They'll hire more then?
They'll hire more, but then what happens?
Will people ask for higher wages?
Yeah, there are going to be fewer and fewer workers for the firms to compete over to hire. So Sophia's exactly right. They're going to want to hire more people to produce all that output. But the net result of that is all the firms are going to be competing with each other for the same number of workers who are out there looking for jobs. That's going to push wages up, and what impact is that going to have in the long run? What happens next?
Will the short run aggregate supply curve shift to the left?
Yes, it's going to cause short run aggregate supply to shift up to the left, and now we're back where we were. Okay? So we've examined it from both angles. That's what happens. That's why we have a long run aggregate supply curve at potential output. Because things can happen in the short run that push us to the right or to the left of our potential output, but eventually the changes that come about in nominal wages as a result of that cause a shift in short run aggregate supply so that we're back where we started. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so that's the process. You will need to be able to demonstrate that you can do that. Okay, so I just drew it, but here the slides go through it. Okay, here, this is a recessionary gap. This one is an inflationary gap. And if you want, you can think of recession is to the left of long run aggregate supply. inflationary gap is gonna be anything to the right of the long run aggregate supply curve or our potential output, okay? All right. I want you guys to practice this with your table partner. Yeah, okay?